Right now, in China, you can walk into a dealership and drive away in a brand new electric car for about $7,700. Not a golf cart, not a toy. A real car with doors, seat belts, air conditioning, and a screen on the dashboard. Meanwhile, in America, the average new car now costs almost $49,000. That means one American car buyer could trade places with 5 Chinese car buyers, and everyone would still drive home happy. 5 brand new cars for the price of one. Let that sink in for a second because it gets stranger. This is not a fluke. It is not a cheap knockoff trick. It is the result of a plan that China built over 20 years, piece by piece, while American car companies were busy chasing something completely different. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why one country can sell you a real car for less than a used couch, while the other country can barely get you into a car for less than a small house. And the reason is not what most people think. The trap nobody sees coming. Let's start with the number that should stop you in your tracks. The average new car in America right now costs close to $49,000. Not a luxury car, not a fancy truck, just the average car, the one a normal family drives to work and school every single day. 20 years ago, that same amount of money could have covered a down payment on a house in a lot of the country. Now it barely gets you a set of wheels. Here is where it gets worse. Most people cannot pay $49,000 in cash, so they take out a loan. But car loans used to be short. People paid off their car in 4 years and moved on with their life. Today, more than 1 out of every 3 new car loans stretches out 6 years or longer. Some stretch to 7 years. Some even stretch to 8. That means people are still making payments on a car long after the tires have worn out and the paint has faded. On top of that, interest rates on car loans are not cheap right now either. The average new car loan carries an interest rate of close to 7%. That might not sound like much, but stretched across a loan that size for that many years, it adds thousands and thousands of dollars on top of the sticker price. So the $49,000 car is not really a $49,000 car at all once the loan is fully paid off. By the time the final payment clears, a lot of buyers have handed over closer to $60,000 for a vehicle that started depreciating the moment they drove it home. Think about what that actually feels like. You buy a car. You start driving it. And within the very first year, it has already lost a big chunk of its value just from driving it off the lot. But your loan does not shrink at the same speed. So the car keeps getting cheaper while your debt barely moves. After a while, a huge number of drivers end up owing more money than their car is even worth. Right now, roughly 3 out of every 10 people trading in a car for a new one are in exactly that spot. On average, they owe about $7,000 more than their old car could even sell for. That is not pocket change. That is real money, just gone, sitting on top of a brand new loan. And here is the sneaky part. Car dealers do not usually ask you how much the car costs. They ask a different question. Can you handle $700 a month? Maybe $800? That number sounds manageable. It fits next to your rent and your grocery bill without feeling scary. But that friendly little monthly number is hiding the real size of the debt underneath it. Stretch the loan out long enough, and almost any price starts to feel affordable, even when it really is not. It is like being handed a giant boulder, but told to carry it 1 pebble at a time. Each pebble feels light. The boulder is still a boulder. It gets worse when you look at the used car market too, because that used to be the safety net for people who could not afford a new car. Not anymore. Used car prices have climbed so high that the average used car now costs around $25,000 to $30,000. That is basically what a brand new small car used to cost not too long ago. So even the backup plan, the cheaper option people use to fall back on, has gotten squeezed. There is barely any room left at the bottom for someone who just needs something simple and reliable to get to work. Imagine a normal family trying to buy a car right now. They walk into a dealership hoping to spend $25,000. The salesperson shows them a few options. But somehow the conversation always drifts toward a bigger trim, a longer warranty, an extra package. By the time they sign the paperwork, they are financing $45,000 over 7 years, telling themselves it is fine because the monthly payment fits. That family is not being careless. They are just walking through a system that was quietly built, piece by piece, to make bigger numbers feel small. So how did an entire country end up here, locked into car payments that stretch longer than some marriages last? The answer starts with a decision American car companies made a long time ago, one that seemed smart at the time, but quietly reshaped the entire market. If a number like that surprised you, imagine how surprised you will be by what is coming in the next few minutes, because the real story gets even wilder. Hit that like button and subscribe now, not just for the algorithm, but because this channel breaks down the hidden money stories that actually affect your wallet, the ones nobody explains in plain English. You will want to see where this one goes. The day America walked away from cheap cars. Here is something most people do not realize. American car companies did not lose the ability to make cheap cars. They chose to stop making them. Years ago, car companies noticed something in their own sales numbers. A big truck or a big SUV made way more profit per sale than a small, simple car. Not a little more. A lot more. So slowly, without any big announcement, car companies started backing away from cheap, basic cars. Small sedans got discontinued one by one. Entry-level models quietly disappeared from the lineup. Instead, showrooms filled up with bigger trucks, bigger SUVs, and fancier trim packages loaded with features a lot of buyers never even asked for. Think about it like a restaurant that used to serve a simple $5 sandwich. One day, the owner notices that the $15 deluxe sandwich makes way more profit. So the $5 sandwich quietly disappears from the menu. Nobody announces it. It just stops showing up. Eventually, everyone walking in the door has no choice but to order the expensive one, even if all they wanted was something simple. That is basically what happened across the entire American car industry. Today, trucks and SUVs make up the vast majority of what gets sold in the country. A basic full-size pickup often starts around $40,000 on paper, but by the time real buyers walk out the door, they are paying over $60,000 on average once features and trims get added. Huge touchscreens, fancy sound systems, driver assist packages. Some of it is genuinely useful. A lot of it is just extra cost stacked onto a price tag that was already too high for a lot of families. You can actually see this shift in the raw numbers. Trucks and SUVs now make up more than 80% of every new vehicle sold in America. 80%. That means the simple, affordable sedan that used to be the default choice for most families is now the exception, not the rule. If you want a genuinely cheap new car today, you can find one, but you have to actually hunt for it. Most of the truly affordable options left on the market start around $22,000 to $25,000. And once you add any real options at all, that price climbs fast. Car companies did not remove the cheap car by accident. They simply followed the profit, one spreadsheet decision at a time, until the affordable end of the market almost disappeared on its own. For the car companies, this was a brilliant business move. Profits went up, stock prices climbed, executives were thrilled. But for regular buyers, especially first-time buyers, retirees on a fixed income, or families trying to stick to a budget, the affordable entry point into car ownership basically vanished. The cheap car did not get harder to build. It got removed from the plan entirely because the math on a spreadsheet said something bigger and pricier made more sense. While all of this was happening in America, something completely different was happening on the other side of the planet. China was not trying to squeeze more profit out of each car sale. China was trying to solve a totally different puzzle, one that starts long before a single car ever rolls off an assembly line. The hidden machine behind China's cheap cars. A lot of people hear about cheap Chinese cars and assume it comes down to cheap labor. That explanation sounds simple, but it barely scratches the surface of what is actually going on. Modern car factories, whether they are in China or in Michigan, use huge amounts of automation. Robots do most of the heavy lifting. Labor cost is not the main reason prices are so different anymore. The real difference is something much bigger and much harder to copy. It is the entire system built around the car, long before it ever reaches a factory floor. Picture how a car usually gets built in America. The battery might come from one company in one state. The touchscreen comes from a different supplier somewhere else. The software running the car gets licensed from a separate tech company entirely. The raw materials for the battery might get mined on one continent, processed on another, and shipped halfway around the world before they even reach the factory. Every single handoff between companies adds cost. Every shipment across a border adds time and paperwork. Every separate contract adds its own markup on top. It is a little like trying to bake a cake where the flour comes from one store across town, the eggs come from a farm 2 states away, the sugar gets shipped in from overseas, and the oven itself has to be rented from a completely different company for the day. By the time you actually start baking, you have already spent a small fortune just gathering the ingredients and paying everyone involved in getting them to your kitchen. Now imagine a bakery that grows its own wheat, keeps its own chickens, and owns the oven outright. That bakery can sell a cheaper cake and still make a healthy profit, simply because it skipped all those extra costs stacked in the middle. Now picture what China spent roughly 2 decades quietly building instead. Battery factories sitting close to the car factories that need them. Companies that build electronics for phones, home appliances, and cars, all sharing the same supply chains and often the same factories. Software teams working directly inside car companies instead of being hired out as an outside contractor. Mines, chemical plants, battery cell factories, and car assembly lines, all connected like one giant machine instead of dozens of separate businesses making deals with each other. Here is why that matters so much. When one part of that machine finds a cheaper or better way to do something, the entire chain benefits almost instantly. If engineers figure out a better way to build a battery cell, that improvement can show up in finished cars within weeks instead of years. That speed adds up. Small improvements, made constantly and shared instantly across the whole system, eventually stack into a massive cost advantage that is incredibly hard for anyone else to catch up to quickly. And sitting right in the middle of all of this is one part of the car that changed everything: the battery. In an electric car, the battery is the most expensive and most important piece, kind of like how the engine used to be the heart of a gas-powered car. Whoever builds batteries the cheapest basically controls the price of the entire vehicle. China figured this out early and went all in. Instead of just building factories to assemble battery packs, Chinese companies built the entire chain from the ground up. Mining operations to dig up the raw materials, chemical plants to process those materials into battery-grade ingredients, massive factories to build the battery cells themselves, recycling systems to pull materials out of old batteries and feed them back into new ones. The whole loop, built and refined under one long-term plan for roughly 20 years straight. When you own every single link in that chain, savings pile up at every single step. A small improvement in mining saves money in processing. A small improvement in processing saves money in manufacturing. A small improvement in manufacturing lowers the price of every single battery pack that gets built, and that lower price flows straight down into the sticker price of the car. This is the actual secret behind China's rock-bottom EV prices. It is not a shortcut. It is not a trick. It is 2 decades of patient, connected investment finally paying off all at once. There is another piece of this puzzle that does not get talked about enough, and that is competition. In China, there are dozens of car companies all fighting for the exact same customers at the exact same time. When one company drops its price or adds a new feature, every other company feels it within weeks. Nobody gets to sit comfortably at the top for very long. That constant pressure forces prices down again and again, year after year, in a way that just does not happen in a market with only a handful of major players. Imagine 40 different sandwich shops on the same street, all trying to outprice each other every single week. The customer wins every time. That is roughly what has been happening in China's car market for the past several years. But battery factories, supply chains, and fierce competition are only part of the story. The real surprise is what China actually decided to build with all of that cheap battery power, because it is not what most people in the West expect at all. The tiny cars nobody is laughing at anymore. Here is where the story gets almost unbelievable. Walk through a car show in China today and you will see something strange. Tiny electric cars, some barely bigger than a golf cart, selling for around $5,000 to $12,000. Small electric pickup trucks that look like a normal truck got shrunk down to 2/3 of its size. Little city cars with round headlights and cheerful colors that look almost like toys parked next to giant American pickups. A lot of Western visitors see these little cars and laugh. They look small, they look simple. But here is the twist. Right now, in China, there are more than 200 different electric and hybrid car models selling for under $25,000. The single cheapest real production EV on the market runs about $7,700. That is one car. Reuters actually compared the 5 best-selling budget EVs in China and added up their prices. All 5 of them together still cost less than the average price of just one new car in America. 5 real cars, with real batteries, real safety features, and real warranties for the price of one average American vehicle. Let's actually look at what some of these cars are, because the details are wild. One of the top-selling cars in all of China last year was not a big fancy SUV. It was a small electric car that comes with a front trunk, a huge touchscreen, and enough range to drive across a mid-sized state on a single charge, all while starting at a price that would barely cover the down payment on an average American truck. There is another tiny model that leans hard into the cheap and cheerful look, boxy, simple, almost cartoonish. But it now comes with 4 doors and enough room in the back for real adult passengers, not just kids. And then there is a slightly bigger option that added extra safety tech, a longer driving range, and even upgraded from 1 windshield wiper to 2, because yes, some early budget models were so stripped down they only had a single wiper blade to save cost. These are not concept cars sitting on a stage. People are driving these to work every single day. Walk through the big car show in Beijing, and the contrast hits you immediately. Rows and rows of small, cheerful, brightly colored electric cars, priced like a decent laptop, sitting just a few aisles away from luxury models that could compete with anything coming out of Europe. It is a car market selling to everyone at once, from the person who just needs basic transportation to the person who wants the newest technology money can buy. America's market, by comparison, has almost nothing left at that bottom rung. So why does this actually matter? Because most people do not need a giant truck for their daily life. Think about your average Tuesday. You drive to work. You stop at the store on the way home. Maybe you pick up a kid from practice. You visit a friend 15 minutes away. Most people never tow a boat. Most people never drive off-road through mud. Most trips barely touch highway speed for more than a few minutes at a time. Yet a huge number of Americans are paying $49,000 or more for a vehicle built to survive conditions they will never actually face. It is a little like buying a massive industrial freezer just to keep a 6-pack cold. Sure, it works, but it is way more machine than the job actually needs. China's little cars are not trying to impress anyone with fancy specs. They are not chasing luxury buyers. They exist to do one simple job well: move a person from point A to point B as cheaply as possible. That single idea opens up an enormous market that America has mostly ignored. Students who cannot afford a car payment plus insurance plus gas. Retirees on a fixed income who gave up driving because it got too expensive. Families in crowded cities where a giant SUV barely fits in a parking spot. Delivery drivers who just need something small and cheap to run all day. Millions and millions of people who want a car, but have simply been priced out of owning one. Think about how many people around the world fall into that group. Not just in China, but across Southeast Asia, Latin America, and parts of Africa, where a $50,000 car was never even a realistic option to begin with. These cheap little EVs are already showing up in those places too, giving entire communities their very first real shot at owning a car. That is not a small side market. That could end up being hundreds of millions of future customers, all being served by one country, while most of the world's other car makers are still busy fighting over the wealthiest buyers at the top. Right now, China is one of the only major car markets in the world seriously building products for those people. And that quiet decision might end up being one of the most important business moves of the decade, because history has already shown us exactly what happens next when a giant company ignores the cheap end of a market. The pattern that keeps repeating itself. There is a pattern in business that shows up again and again, almost like a rule nobody wrote down, but everyone eventually learns the hard way. Years ago, one company actually invented the digital camera, but that same company made most of its money selling film, so it shelved the idea, worried it would hurt its own profits. When cheap digital cameras from other companies finally showed up, it dismissed them as low-quality toys for hobbyists. By the time digital cameras had taken over the entire market, that once giant company was filing for bankruptcy. Around the same time, a huge video rental chain had stores on nearly every street corner in America. A tiny mail-order movie service came along and offered to sell itself for just $50 million. The rental chain said no thanks, convinced the little upstart was not a real threat. A few years later, the rental chain was gone completely, and the little streaming company had reshaped how the entire world watches movies and shows. Then there was the biggest phone maker on the planet in the early 2000s. That company had actually built early touchscreen phones years before anyone else. But leadership could not believe people would ever give up their physical keyboards or that a computer company could seriously compete in making phones. By the time they took the threat seriously, their entire phone business had basically collapsed. Notice the pattern. A big, successful company focuses on the expensive, high-profit part of the market. It walks away from the cheap end because the profit margins look too thin to bother with. A new competitor steps in and serves exactly the customers everyone else abandoned. At first, the giant company laughs it off as low quality or irrelevant. Then, slowly, the new competitor gets better, cheaper, and bigger, until one day it is not just serving the bottom of the market anymore. It is not just about photography, or movie rentals, or phones. It is a pattern that plays out the exact same way, no matter what the product actually is, because it is really a story about human decisions, not about any single piece of technology. American car companies did not walk away from cheap cars because they were foolish. It was a smart business decision at the time, based on real numbers and real profits. But a decision that looks smart in one moment can quietly turn into a huge risk down the road, especially when a competitor on the other side of the planet spends 20 years building the exact machine needed to fill the gap that got left behind. Governments have already started noticing, and they are not sitting still. In the United States, import taxes on Chinese electric cars have climbed so high that they can add well over 100% to the sticker price, basically making it impossible for those cheap cars to be sold there at all right now. Europe has taken a different approach, setting minimum price rules that stop Chinese car makers from selling below a certain floor. Canada has gone somewhere in the middle, allowing a limited number of Chinese EVs in through a quota system at a much lower tax rate. Every one of these countries is essentially doing the same thing in a different way. They are trying to buy time. That might work for a while. It has worked before for a while. But it has never worked forever, because in the end, buyers choose whatever gives them the most value for their money. And when the gap between what people can actually afford and what is sitting on the lot keeps growing, someone somewhere always finds a way to fill it. Tariffs can slow down a car crossing a border. They cannot slow down 20 years of factories, supply chains, and battery technology already sitting there, ready to expand into any market that opens the door even a little. The real question is not whether cheap, simple electric cars eventually become a massive part of the world market. The direction is already pretty clear. The real question is, who ends up building them, who benefits from selling them, and who gets left behind after spending too long laughing at the little cars nobody else wanted to make. None of this means big trucks and luxury SUVs are going away. Plenty of people genuinely want them, need them for work, or can comfortably afford them, and that part of the market is not disappearing anytime soon. But underneath all of that, there is a much bigger, much quieter question that actually shapes where an entire industry goes over the next 20 years. Who takes care of the person who just needs a reliable way to get to work and back? The student, the retiree, the family trying to make a budget stretch. Right now, one country is building an entire industry around answering that question, piece by piece, factory by factory, while another country is still mostly focused on the buyers at the very top. So here is an honest question for you. Do you think American car companies will ever seriously bring back a truly affordable car, or has that chapter closed for good? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this video made you look at the car industry a little differently, tap that like button, subscribe so you catch the next one, and turn on notifications so you do not miss it. And if you liked this, check out the next video in this series, where we dig into what happens to the used car market once cheap EVs actually start showing up on American streets.